August 14th, 2021, 6:47 in the morning, 43 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun had not yet cleared the ridgeline above Shoshone Lake Trail, and the fog sat so low across the meadow that it swallowed the tree line whole, turned the pines into shadows, turned the shadows into nothing. 3 people walked into that nothing, and for the better part of 2 years, the wilderness gave nothing back. Her name was Mara Ellison, 26 years old, a graduate student in environmental biology at the University of Colorado Boulder, with 2 published research papers already to her name and a mind that her professors described as, and I'm quoting here, uncomfortably precise. She was not a reckless person. She was not inexperienced. She had spent more hours studying the thermal geology of Yellowstone's backcountry than most park rangers twice her age. She clipped a bright orange GoPro Hero 10 to the left shoulder strap of her pack that morning. She pointed it at herself. She grinned into the lens. That grin is the last image the outside world ever had of her. Her 2 closest friends walked in beside her. The trail absorbed them. The fog closed behind them like a door. They found Mara Ellison 757 days later. She was alive. And the doctors who examined her, the ones who reviewed her blood work, her bone scans, her dermatological panels, her neurological assessments said, in language that was careful and clinical and deeply, deeply unsettled, that they had never seen a human body that looked quite like that. This video contains dramatized and fictionalized elements created for storytelling purposes only. Names, dates, locations, and specific details have been changed or invented. This is not a factual news report. To understand what happened on that trail, to understand any of what follows, you first have to understand who Mara Ellison was before Yellowstone took her. She grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, the kind of kid who collected soil samples instead of trading cards, who asked her parents for a field microscope at age 9 and actually used it. Her mother, Patricia, described her in an interview as, quote, the kind of person who made the world feel more interesting just by being in it. Her father said simply, she always wanted to know what was underneath things. Under the surface, under the map, always underneath. He didn't know, when he said that, how precisely true it would turn out to be. By the time Mara entered the University of Colorado's graduate program in environmental biology, she had already spent 3 field seasons doing soil temperature mapping in geothermal zones across Wyoming and Montana. She understood hydrothermal systems the way a carpenter understands wood grain intuitively, physically, in her hands and her feet. Her thesis work focused on something called subsurface thermal gradient mapping, the measurement and analysis of heat movement through the Earth's crust beneath active volcanic systems. In other words, she was studying what the ground was doing beneath Yellowstone. And what she found in the published surveys in the months before that August trip didn't add up. She mentioned it to Danny Cahill 4 days before they left Denver. Danny was 24, Mara's college roommate from their undergraduate years. A graphic designer, warm, funny, the kind of person who made every group photo better just by being in it. She had never done a multi-day backcountry hike before. She had bought her hiking boots online 6 weeks before the trip and had worn them around her apartment for 3 days to break them in. That was the full extent of her preparation. But she adored Mara, and when Mara asked her to come, she said yes without asking twice. In that text exchange 4 days before departure, Mara wrote, and investigators recovered this from cloud backup records. Later she wrote, I've been reading the old backcountry reports. There are zones near our campsite that aren't on any trail map. The survey data from those zones doesn't match what the surface should look like. I want to see them. Danny replied, that's either the coolest thing I've ever heard or how we die. She added a laughing emoji. The 3rd member of the group was Tyler Wren, 27 years old, Mara's boyfriend of 2 years. A former Marine Corps corpsman who had served 2 tours before leaving the military and retraining as a wilderness first responder instructor. He taught survival medicine and backcountry emergency response to search and rescue volunteers across 3 states. He was, by any rational measure, the safest possible person to be in the wilderness with. He carried a certified first aid kit, a water filtration system rated for 50,000 liters, a Garmin InReach mini satellite communicator capable of sending emergency SOS signals from anywhere on Earth, 7 days of food, and a waterproof bivvy rated to -20 Fahrenheit. He was prepared for everything. In a home video recovered from Mara's phone synced to cloud backup, time-stamped 3 days before departure, you can see the three of them on the living room floor of Mara and Danny's Denver apartment. Gear spread everywhere. Danny holds up a freeze-dried beef stroganoff packet and announces, with complete sincerity, "If I die out there, tell people I went out eating this." Tyler laughs so hard the camera shakes. Mara doesn't look up from the map she's studying. In the same video, and investigators flagged this. Watching it later, Mara is seen mounting the orange GoPro to a small camera tripod, adjusting the angle, testing the framing. She looks into the lens and says, "This thing is going to catch everything, every single moment." She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. According to NPS, Backcountry Permit Log, number YNP-BCK 2021081477733. The permit for their trip was issued in the name of Donnie Cahill, party of 3. Destination, Campsite 9B3, Shoshone Lake Circuit. Estimated duration, 8 days. Return check-in, August 22nd. No return check-in was ever recorded. They left Denver at 4 in the morning on August 14th. Patricia Ellison spoke to Mara by phone at the trailhead parking lot, the last conversation they ever had. She told her daughter to be careful near the hot springs. Mara laughed. She said, "Mom, I know more about those hot springs than the people who work here." Patricia said, "I know you do. Be careful anyway." They said goodbye. The call disconnected at 6:31 a.m. 16 minutes later, Mara clipped that orange GoPro to her pack, pressed record, and walked into the trees. And nobody who loved her would see her face again for 757 days. What happened on August 14th has been reconstructed painstakingly, meticulously, from 3 sources. The GoPro footage recovered from Mara's pack, a partial field journal, and a single entry in a backcountry ranger's patrol log. Taken together, they give us a timeline. A clear, detailed, hour-by-hour account of the day that 3 people walked into Yellowstone's backcountry and did not come back. The timeline begins at 6:47 a.m. The GoPro is running. The trailhead is visible behind them, a wooden sign, a gravel lot, Mara's car, 1 other vehicle. The air temperature is 43 degrees Fahrenheit, and the fog is thick enough that Danny exhales and her breath merges with it seamlessly. The footage shows Tyler checking the compass bearing, adjusting the hip belt on his pack. Danny is already several paces ahead, walking fast, trying to stay warm. Mara's voice behind the camera, "Donnie, Donnie, slow down. The trail doesn't start properly for another quarter mile." Danny turns. She sticks her tongue out. She keeps walking. By 9:12 a.m., the temperature had risen to 51 degrees. The fog had lifted from the lower meadow, but clung to the upper reaches of the tree line, filtering the morning light into something gray and diffuse. The GoPro records this beautifully, the way the mist moves through the pines in slow horizontal bands, the ground steam rising from thermal vents along the creek bed, turning the whole scene into something that looks less like Wyoming and more like a place without a name. At 9:12, they reached a trail junction near Shoshone Creek. This is where the first deviation occurred. Mara's GPS device, recovered from her pack much later, in September 2023, showed that at 9:12 a.m. she created a waypoint, manually entered, labeled with a single word, "Here." That waypoint was located 1.3 miles off the permitted trail route. She had already decided, before they left Denver, that she was going to look at those unmapped zones. Tyler knew. He had agreed, reluctantly. Danny, when investigators later asked whether she'd been aware they were leaving the trail, she hadn't known until that moment at the junction. But she followed. She always followed Mara. By 11:40 a.m., The GoPro shows them eating lunch beside a thermal pool. The water is an extraordinary, unnatural shade of turquoise, the mineral concentration of the Shoshone geothermal field, producing colors that don't look like anything that should occur in nature. The steam rises from the surface in slow, lazy columns. Danny stirs the edge of it with a stick and says, "It looks like it's alive." Tyler tells her not to touch it. The surface temperature of uncontained hydrothermal pools in this zone can exceed 80 degrees Celsius. She puts the stick down. The air smells of sulfur and pine. You can hear it in the footage, the low pressurized hiss of the vent systems beneath the earth, steady as breathing. At 2:15 p.m., Mara makes the last entry in her field journal. Investigators would not read this entry for another 2 years. But when they did, when D.S. Lena Rosario of the Teton County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit sat down with that journal and read those words, she read them twice. Then she set the journal down. Then she picked it up and read them a third time. Mara wrote, "Venting column northeast of 9B3 subzone. Ground temperature reads 61 degrees Celsius at 4 centimeter depth, far above published survey figures for this corridor. Tyler thinks I'm obsessing. Maybe. But something here doesn't match. The published surveys don't show this. Nobody has mapped this correctly. The ground sounds hollow. The ground sounds hollow." At 4:30 p.m., according to NPS Backcountry Patrol log filed by Ranger James Kessler, badge number YNPBCK0047, the campsite at 9B3 was empty. No equipment, no sign of occupancy. Kessler noted it in his log and continued his circuit. Their check-in wasn't due until the following day. No action required. No action required. He would think about that entry for the rest of his career. After 4:30 p.m. on August 14, 2021, there is no confirmed external sighting of any of the three. No ranger contact, no other hikers, no trail camera images. Nothing. At 6:03 p.m., the GoPro recording ends. The final frame, the absolute last image captured before the recording cuts out, shows Mara pointing the camera at the ground. Not at the trail. Not at the thermal pool. At the ground, directly beneath her feet. The ground is steaming, not from a visible vent, not from surface runoff, from below, from directly below where she is standing. At 11:58 p.m., deep in the dark, 5 hours after that footage ended, the Garmin InReach Mini satellite communicator registered to Tyler Wren sent a single automated GPS ping. One signal. The coordinates placed the device 0.6 miles northeast of the last known trail position. In an area with no trail designation, no survey markers, no official name on any park map. Then the device went silent. Forever. Back in Denver, Patricia Ellison called her daughter at 9 p.m., straight to voicemail. She called again at midnight, at 2 a.m., at 3, each time, voicemail. Each time the message getting slightly more difficult to leave with a steady voice. By 5 a.m., she was not sleeping. By 6 a.m., she was calling the park. And somewhere inside the earth, beneath the thermal fields of Yellowstone, 3 people were not coming to the surface. The National Park Service launched its official search and rescue operation on August 16, 2021, 36 hours after the group failed to make contact. The operation was designated NPS Case Number Y, NP-SAR 2021-081-60044. It would become the largest backcountry search and rescue deployment in Yellowstone's history. And it would find nothing. In the early hours of August 16th, the temperature at the Shoshone Lake trailhead was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. A light wind moved through the lodgepole pines from the northwest, carrying the sulfur smell of the thermal fields down toward the parking lot where the command post had been established in 3 canvas tents and 2 NPS vehicles. Search Coordinator Lieutenant Wayne Duff, a 20-year NPS veteran, briefed his teams at 5:30 a.m. Assets deployed: 4K, 9 units, 2 Bloodhound teams, 2 air scent specialists, 2 NPS Bell, 407 helicopters fitted with FLIR thermal imaging, 22 ground volunteers from the Teton County Search and Rescue Association, 6 NPS law enforcement rangers, an aerial photography drone unit, and a liaison from the Teton County Sheriff's Major Crimes Unit, Detective Sergeant Lena Rosario, 39 years old, assigned initially as a precaution in the event the disappearance proved to have a criminal element. She would be the last investigator still working the case, years later. On day 1, the K-9 teams picked up scent from the 9B3 campsite almost immediately. Both independent teams tracked the same line northeast, away from the permitted trail toward the restricted thermal zone that the NPS maps labeled only with a maintenance notation: unstable surface, no access. The zone had no official name. Park staff called it informally the Dead Zone, a roughly 3.2 square mile thermal field with extreme ground instability, unpredictable hydrothermal venting, and in certain areas, ground temperatures sufficient to cause third-degree burns through the soles of standard hiking boots within minutes. The K-9 teams tracked to the edge of the Dead Zone and stopped. Not because they lost the scent, because their handlers pulled them back. The ground in the Dead Zone does not support safe movement. It is not solid in the way that the word ground implies. It is a crust, in some places, as thin as 4 centimeters over a network of hydrothermal cavities and steam channels that shift and vent without warning. A person of average weight can break through the surface crust in that zone without visual warning. What lies beneath the surface crust is not soil. It is superheated water and mineral slurry at temperatures that leave nothing recoverable. The search teams did not enter the Dead Zone. Protocol did not allow it. Day 3 brought the first physical evidence. A volunteer searcher, 43-year-old Carl Whitfield of the Teton County SAR team, was working a grid pattern 1.8 miles northeast of the 9B3 campsite when he found a fragment of fabric snagged on the lower branch of a lodgepole, pine at knee height. Green, waterproof shell material. Consistent with the rain jacket Danny Cahill had been photographed wearing in the last known images of her. The fragment was logged as physical evidence item number 4 under case YNPSAR 2021-08160044. It was bagged, tagged, photographed in situ. Forensic analysis would later confirm a 94.3% fiber composition match with the jacket brand registered in Danny's Amazon purchase history. It was her jacket, there was no question. But D.S. Rosario noticed something when she reviewed the crime scene photographs that same evening. No footprints. The ground around the tree, the soft, moisture-retaining volcanic soil that should have preserved the impression of anyone who approached close enough to snag fabric on that branch, showed no footprints. Not one, not in any direction, as if the jacket had arrived there without anyone carrying it. Rosario flagged it in her field notes. She circled it. She wrote one word beside the circle: how. She didn't have an answer. She wouldn't have one for a long time. On day 7, one of the helicopter crews conducting FLIR thermal sweeps over the restricted zone reported an anomaly. A heat signature, stationary, body heat-sized, located approximately 2 miles inside the Dead Zone perimeter, well beyond any safe ground access point. The coordinates were logged. The crew made 2 additional passes. The signature remained. The ground beneath it was producing no abnormal surface thermal reading, suggesting the heat source was below the surface, not on it. By the time a ground team reached the closest accessible coordinates, which still required a 4-hour approach from the nearest safe trail, the signature was gone. The FLIR data was logged and analyzed by the NPS Remote Sensing Unit. Their assessment: thermal anomaly consistent with mammalian heat signature. Source location could not be confirmed. Possible geological explanation: localized steam venting, producing false positive, cannot be ruled out as biological. That assessment covered 2 sentences of a 6-page FLIR report. It was never followed up. The search continued for 34 more days. Day 41. Lieutenant Duff convened the final briefing at the command post at 7 a.m. The temperature had dropped to 29 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. The first frost of the approaching autumn had settled across the meadow. The search teams gathered in the cold, and they were told, in the language of official procedure, that the operation was being suspended. Total search area covered, 147 square miles. Total operational days, 41. Personnel deployed across the full operation, more than 300 individuals. Evidence recovered, 1 jacket fragment, 1 GPS coordinate, 1 FLIR anomaly that couldn't be confirmed. No human remains, no further personal effects, no explanation. The official NPS classification entered into the file on September 26, 2021, and this is quoted directly from the case record. Status: unexplained disappearance, presumed fatality. Case designated open inactive per NPS Missing Persons Protocol. Section 14.7. Resource reallocation approved. 3 people, 3 files, stamped and shelved. The GoPro Mara's orange GoPro Hero 10, last seen clipped to her pack at the trailhead at 6:47 a.m. on August 14th, was formally logged as missing evidence item number 3. Listed alongside the Garmin InReach as item 1 and Mara's field journal as item 2. The notation in the evidence log read simply, "Device fate unknown, presumed lost with subject." The families were notified, the press releases were issued, the case number was filed, and then silence. For years. 1 year. Patricia Ellison filed a formal petition with the National Park Service to reopen the investigation in August 2022 on the anniversary of her daughter's disappearance. The petition was reviewed and denied within 6 weeks. The response letter cited insufficient new evidence and resource constraints. Patricia kept the letter. She kept everything. By the end of the first year, she had 2 binders. By the end of the second, a shelf. Danny Cahill's parents, Robert and Maureen Cahill of Lakewood, Colorado, held a memorial service in Denver in the spring of 2022. 60 people attended. Her colleagues from the design firm, her college friends, her younger brother who had to be supported by 2 people when he stood up to speak. They played a song she had loved in college. The kind of song that means nothing until it means everything. No body was present to bury. There was nothing to bury. Tyler Wren's sister, a civil attorney named Gwen Wren Hartley, hired a private investigator in late 2022. A former FBI agent named Curtis Bassey spent 4 months retracing the case, reviewing the satellite ping coordinates, consulting with a geologist at Montana State University about the dead zone terrain, attempting to identify any access points into the restricted thermal field that the original search teams might have missed. His final report ran to 43 pages, his conclusion in the final paragraph. The terrain in question is geologically unstable and effectively unsearchable using standard ground or aerial methods. Without subsurface geological mapping, which has never been conducted in the specific northeast quadrant of the restricted zone, the ultimate fate of the 3 missing individuals cannot be determined from surface evidence. Alone. He charged $18,000. Gwen Wren Hartley paid it, and filed the report next to Bassey's business card and her brother's discharge papers from the Marines. 3 years. In March 2024, 2.5 years after the disappearance, Patricia Ellison drove to the Teton County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak with DS Lena Rosario directly. Not through a press officer, not through a family liaison, directly. Rosario had not forgotten the case. She had, if anything, been unable to forget it. She had transferred to the cold case unit in part because cases like this one, cases with no resolution, no remains, no explanation, that fully covered the facts were the kind of cases that lived behind your eyes when you tried to sleep. She agreed to informally review the file. She cleared her weekend. She brewed a pot of coffee at 7 p.m. on a Friday night, and she sat down with the full case file, all 412 pages, and she read it beginning to end. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. that she found it. The Garmin InReach Tyler's satellite communicator Evidence item number 1 had transmitted a single GPS ping at 11:58 p.m. on August 14th. Everyone knew that. It had been mapped, analyzed, logged. What had not been analyzed, what had apparently been processed by a junior technician who hadn't known what they were looking at, was a secondary data packet embedded in the same transmission. Satellite communicators like the Garmin inReach transmit not just coordinates but also environmental sensor data, including barometric pressure. The barometric reading in that secondary packet indicated that the device, at the time of transmission, was at an elevation approximately 340 feet lower than the surface coordinates suggested. 340 feet. That is not a measurement error. That is not atmospheric variance. That is the difference between standing on the ground and being beneath it. Tyler Wren's satellite communicator had not been on the surface when it sent that ping. It had been underground. Rosario noted this finding in a cold case review memo dated March 4, 2024. Document number TCOCC0091. She flagged it for geological consultation and forwarded it to the university contact provided in Bassey's original investigation report. And then she made a second call, an informal one, to the NPS tipline archives because she had a habit, when reopening cold files, of checking whether any public tips had come in after the case went inactive. There had been one. Filed in February 2023, 18 months after the disappearance. A voicemail. From an unregistered number. A burner phone. As it turned out, the carrier traced the IMEI to a prepaid SIM purchased with cash at a gas station in Bozeman, Montana, and never activated again after that single call. The voice on the recording was male. Calm. Almost too calm, with a particular quality that Rosario noted in her file as rehearsed. Like someone who had decided what they wanted to say and was careful about saying exactly that and nothing more. He said, "The 3 that went missing near the Shoshone Zone. You're looking in the wrong direction. You should be asking about the seasonal worker permits. Someone who was in the park that week. Someone who went back." That was all. The tip had been logged, assigned to a field agent. The field agent had retired 4 months later. The voicemail had not been followed up. It sat in the archived tip file for over a year before Rosario's eyes found it at 2:45 in the morning. She put her coffee cup down. She picked up her pen. The GoPro evidence item. Number 3. Fate unknown was still listed in the case file exactly as it had been entered in the fall of 2021. But Rosario had noticed something in reviewing the metadata analysis performed on the recovered footage. The camera's internal recording timestamp, logged at the point the footage ended, read 18 hours, 3 minutes, and 44 seconds. The recording had ended at 6:03 p.m. But the GoPro Hero 10's continuous recording capacity on a fully charged battery with a high-capacity memory card was approximately 48 hours before requiring a charge. The camera had battery left when the recording stopped. It hadn't died. It had been paused, or it had been put somewhere dark enough to trigger the automatic darkness shutoff. Or the recording had continued, somewhere the surface couldn't see. Nobody knew that 40 miles away, in a small urgent care clinic just outside West Yellowstone, a hunter named Carl Braddock was describing something he had seen in the backcountry to a nurse. Something he couldn't stop thinking about. Something standing at the edge of the tree line near the Bechler River corridor, watching him with complete stillness for nearly 4 minutes before it turned and walked back into the trees. Something that looked almost like a person. Before we go any further, if this story has kept you watching this far, hit that subscribe button right now, because what we are about to reveal is the part that investigators still cannot explain. September 9th, 2023. 7:22 a.m. 51 degrees Fahrenheit. A clear morning in the Bechler River corridor, 41 miles southwest of the Shoshone Lake trailhead. The kind of cold that sits in your lungs when you breathe. The pines were motionless. The only sound was the river low, late summer, moving slow over its stones. Carl Braddock, 51 years old, a licensed elk hunter from Billings, Montana, had been in this section of the corridor since 4 a.m. He was moving quietly, the way hunters move, weight shifting heel to toe, head up, watching the tree line for movement. He found it. But it wasn't elk. What he saw, through his 8-power binoculars, crouched at the edge of a thermal runoff channel approximately 80 yards from his position, was a human figure. A woman. She was crouched with her knees to her chest, both hands cupped in the steam-warmed runoff water, drinking from it. Her feet were bare against the volcanic rock in 51-degree air. Her hair was long and matted and had gone white, not gray, white. She was wearing the remnants of clothing that had once, a long time ago, had been hiking apparel, the fabric so degraded by time and moisture and the thermal environment that it had taken on the color and texture of the ground itself, as though she had been dipped in the earth and left to dry. She was thin. Braddock told investigators later, and this is from his formal statement filed with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office on September 9th, he told them, "I've field-dressed a lot of animals. I know what a body looks like when it's had the weight taken off it wrong. This wasn't starvation thin. This was something else, something about the proportions. Like something had been rearranged inside her, like the weight had come off in a way that wasn't natural." He approached, slowly, hands visible. He announced himself. He said, "Hey, are you all right? Can you hear me?" She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She turned and looked at him with eyes that were open and clear and completely, utterly without expression, not vacant present, but focused on something he couldn't identify, something that wasn't him. He asked her name. She said nothing for a long moment. The thermal water hissed. The pines were still. The sky above the corridor was pale and cold and cloudless. And then, in a voice that Braddock described as flat, like someone reading words out of a language they understand but don't feel, she said, "The ground is still talking." That was all. She allowed him to approach. She allowed him to wrap his hunting jacket around her shoulders. She did not speak again until emergency services arrived 40 minutes later. She was transported by ground ambulance to Ridgeline Valley Medical Center, a 34-bed regional hospital in West Yellowstone, and admitted at 9:18 a.m. She had no identification, no wallet, no phone. She was logged initially as a Jane Doe. But she was gripping something. When the admitting nurse, Tricia Okafor, RN, began to catalog the patient's personal effects for the intake record, the patient refused to release a bundle of material she was holding against her chest. The bundle appeared to be the remains of a backpack. The frame collapsed, the fabric almost entirely disintegrated, the straps reduced to threads. Okafor worked gently, patiently, for nearly 11 minutes before the woman's grip loosened enough to allow the bundle to be carefully separated. And clipped to what remained of the left shoulder strap still attached, somehow, impossibly, was an orange GoPro Hero 10 inches, a waterproof housing. One side of the housing had been partially melted. The surface bore the pitting and mineral deposits of long hydrothermal exposure. The lens was intact. The device was dead battery, fully depleted. Okafor photographed the device as part of the intake record. A deputy from the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, on scene for the Jane Doe intake, ran the device serial number through the NPS property database. The result came back in 4 hours. The GoPro was registered to Mara Ellison. Date of registration, June 14, 2021. Case reference, YNPSAR 20210-816-0044. Status, missing evidence, presumed lost. The deputy called D.S. Rosario at 1347. She was in her car and on the road to West Yellowstone within 6 minutes. But the real horror wasn't where she was found. It wasn't the 2 years unaccounted for. It wasn't the white hair, or the mineral-saturated skin, or the bare feet on cold rock. It was what the attending physician found when she conducted the full intake examination findings so far outside any known medical framework that she did not call the hospital administrator when she completed her notes. She called the CDC. The following account is drawn from medical records subpoenaed during the federal prosecution of Grant Aldis in 2024. The clinical notes are quoted directly. The language is precise because medical language is required to be precise, and in this case, that precision makes what was found in Mara Ellison's body more disturbing, not less. Attending physician Dr. Camille Ferris, M.D., General and Emergency Medicine, Ridgeline Valley Medical Center, began her full intake examination at 11:05 a.m. on September 9, 2023. Her notes are filed under hospital record number RVMC 2023 MJE. Clinical. Weight at admission, 81 pounds. Mara Ellison had weighed 134 pounds at her last recorded physical examination in April 2021, 5 months before the disappearance. The loss of 53 pounds over approximately 25 months represents a rate and distribution of weight reduction that Dr. Ferris noted in her clinical language as, quote, inconsistent with expected patterns of environmental starvation or caloric restriction. The core musculature, the deep stabilizing muscles of the trunk, the psoas, the paraspinal group was abnormally preserved. The extremities showed extreme atrophy, as if the body had made a deliberate calculus about what mattered and stripped everything else away. Dr. Ferris ordered a full skeletal density scan. The results were reviewed by the hospital's radiologist on call, Dr. Yusuf Manna. He entered his findings in a radiology report filed the following morning. He noted, bone mineral density demonstrates an unusual pattern of remodeling inconsistent with standard depletion expected from malnutrition or immobility. Findings suggest a cycle of mineral resorption, followed by remineralization. The mineral profile of the secondary deposition layer is consistent with hydrothermal silica and calcium carbonate compounds rather than normal physiological calcium. This presentation has not been encountered in the existing literature reviewed. Her bones had been partly dissolved, and then rebuilt out of the minerals in the water. The dermatological panel returned its results 48 hours after admission. The findings, logged under the CDC Environmental Exposure Division consultation, referral, sulfur concentration in subcutaneous tissue at 4.7 times the normal serum threshold. Silica at 2.1 times normal. Trace concentrations of barium, lithium, and manganese, all consistent with hydrothermal source water from the Yellowstone geothermal system. These minerals were not on the surface of her skin. They were in it, absorbed through it. Through months, the medical consensus estimated 18 to 24 months of sustained skin contact with thermal water at concentrations sufficient to drive transdermal mineral absorption at a rate that should not, under any physiological model, be possible. The neurological examination was conducted by Dr. Samir Rao, Neurology, on the afternoon of September 9th. His clinical notes describe the cognitive assessment in detail. Mara Ellison did not initially recognize her own name. When the intake nurse said quietly, gently, "Is your name Mara?" there was no response. Not confusion, not a flinch of almost recognition. Nothing. The same absence when her surname was used, when her parents' names were offered, when the name of the university was mentioned. The nurse described the experience later as, "It wasn't like she had amnesia. It wasn't like she couldn't remember. It was more like the words had been filed in the wrong cabinet, like she knew them but couldn't reach them, or like she didn't understand yet why they should mean something to her." Dr. Rao's assessment. Patient presents with profound dissociation from personal identity markers including name, biographical relationships, and geographical origin references. Language function is intact. Semantic knowledge is intact. Patient can identify objects, describe biological processes, read topographic notation. Personal memory structure is severely disrupted. This presentation is not consistent with traumatic amnesia following acute injury. It is consistent with, and I am noting this with the caveat that no established clinical category fully applies, Prolonged extreme sensory isolation combined with novel environmental conditioning of a kind and duration not previously documented in the medical literature. She asked on the second day of admission to see a map of the Shoshone Basin. When it was brought to her, she oriented it correctly within seconds. She traced a route with her finger from the trailhead along the creek northeast into the dead zone without hesitation. Then she stopped. She placed her finger on a point roughly 2 miles inside the restricted boundary. She pressed down. She said nothing. On day 3, when asked about Tyler and Danny, she was quiet for 40 seconds. The attending therapist, Dr. Helen Marsh, Psy. D., documented the pause in her session notes. Then Mara said, "Tyler went down first. Danny went after. I stayed." Down, Dr. Marsh noted. Not fell. Not was injured. Went. She asked carefully what Mara meant by down. Mara looked at the window. She said, "The same place I was." Dr. Marsh asked, "Were you all together? Were Tyler and Danny with you in the same place?" Mara said, "At first." And then she said nothing else on the subject for 6 weeks. When Dr. Marsh mentioned in the 3rd therapy session, gently, as part of a broader object recognition exercise, that Mara's orange camera had been recovered with her, something changed. For the first time since admission, Mara's affect shifted. Her posture changed. She turned her head sharply, the way a person turns toward a sound in the night, her pupils dilated. She asked, and her voice was suddenly clear and urgent in a way it hadn't been since her admission, "Is the footage still on it? All of it? Does it go all the way to the end?" Dr. Marsh noted the response. She circled it in her session file, and within the hour, she had D.S. Rosario on the phone. Because somebody needed to watch that camera's footage. All 847 hours of it. The GoPro Hero 10 evidence item. Number 3. Case YNPSAR 2021081-60044 was transferred to the NPS Digital Forensics Unit at the agency's regional office in Jackson, Wyoming on September 11, 2023. The extraction and analysis were conducted in partnership with the FBI's Rocky Mountain Field Office, assigned under FBI Evidence Analysis Report, number FBIRMF 2023-DIG7741. The device was plugged into a forensic extraction rig at 14:23 hours. The battery was dead. On auxiliary power, the device initialized in 40 seconds. The footage counter on the device's internal memory read 847 hours, 22 minutes, 14 seconds. Lead Analyst Special Agent Derek Houle, 22 years with the FBI's Digital Evidence Division, logged the initialization in his case notes and began the review. He would request reassignment after day 4. His request was denied. The first 3 hours of footage were, in Houle's word, documented in his formal report, unremarkable. The trail, the fog, the cold morning light through the pines. Danny laughing, walking too fast. Tyler adjusting his pack. Mara narrating her field observations in precise, academic language, thermal gradient estimates, soil temperature readings, venting column identification. It is the footage of 3 people who have no idea, who are happy and cold and alive, and have no concept of what the next 2 years of their lives are going to look like. This is the most difficult part of the footage to watch, not what comes later. This, hour 4. The footage changes. At the 4-hour 12-minute mark, the GoPro captures a sound. It appears before the image changes a low, subsonic resonance that the audio forensics team would later describe in their supplemental report as a vibration in the 40 to 60 Hz range, sustained, not consistent with geological venting or surface wind interaction. It sounds, if you half close your eyes and let yourself hear it, like the earth exhaling. Mara turns the camera toward the sound. Tyler's hand enters the frame, reaching for her arm. Then the camera dips, and the last image from the surface is the ground steaming, hollow-sounding, betraying nothing of what is beneath it. Then the footage goes dark for 11 seconds. And then light, not surface light. A different quality, entirely cool, blue-green, diffuse, coming from the walls of what is clearly, unmistakably, an enclosed space. A cavity, underground, enormous. The NPS geological team, reviewing the footage months later, estimated the primary chamber at a volume exceeding 120,000 cubic meters, roughly equivalent to 50 Olympic swimming pools carved over millennia by the hydrothermal water systems moving through the volcanic substrate beneath the park, naturally formed, completely unmapped, not appearing on any NPS geological survey, any USGS subsurface assessment, any academic geological paper published in the last 100 years of Yellowstone research. The walls emit that blue-green luminescence from dense deposits of thermophilic mineral formations, silica and sulfur compounds that glow faintly under the influence of the geothermal heat that permeates the entire space. Hydrothermal water moves along the floor in slow, silent channels. The temperature in the chamber, based on visual evidence and later geological assessment, hovers near 38 degrees Celsius, warm enough to sustain life. Warm enough to keep a person alive. For hours 4 through 11, the footage follows Tyler. He is methodical, professional, moving through the space with a headlamp, using his hands to measure passages and estimate distances, narrating his movements in the clipped, functional language of his training. He is mapping. He cannot stop himself from mapping. It is who he is. He identifies 3 primary passage openings leading away from the main chamber. He notes, in a voice that is only slightly unsteady, that the air is breathable. The thermal venting appears to cycle fresh air through the system. He finds the runoff channels and identifies them as drinkable after filtration. He is problem-solving, right up until he isn't. At hour 9, Tyler Wren sits down against the chamber wall. He sits with his back to the glowing mineral deposits. He puts his hands on his knees. He does not move again in the subsequent footage. He is present, visible, in the background of multiple later frames, but he doesn't move. He doesn't speak. He sits. Investigators and the consulting forensic psychologist spent considerable time analyzing those hours of footage. The psychologist's assessment: Subject Wren appears to undergo a significant psychological state change between hours 8 and 9. This is not consistent with physical injury or incapacitation. It is consistent with a dissociative episode triggered by extreme environmental stress, isolation, or, and I flag this, with appropriate uncertainty, exposure to a stimulus not captured by the camera that produced a response disproportionate to what is visible in the footage. Something happened to Tyler Wren in that cave in hour 9. The footage doesn't show what. Hour 14. Danny Cahill is visible in the footage from approximately hour 6 onward, moving around the chamber, talking to Mara, helping to try to locate the entrance through which they had fallen. She is frightened. She is holding it together. She is, until hour 14, still clearly herself. In hour 12, she and Mara have a conversation partially audible over the ambient sound of the thermal water, in which Danny says, with extraordinary steadiness, "We're going to get out. I know we are. I just need you to keep talking to me. Keep telling me things. Tell me about the thermal gradients. Tell me anything." And Mara does. She talks for nearly 2 hours, about geology, about the formations around them, about thermophilic bacteria and hydrothermal chemistry, and the way superheated water carries minerals upward from the mantle and deposits them in layers that accrete over thousands of years into the structures they are sitting inside. She talks, and Danny listens, and Tyler sits against the wall and stares at something nobody else can see. Hour 14. One of the 3 passage openings in the chamber, the deepest one, the one that leads away from the main space and down, is emitting a sound, subtle, low. The camera barely picks it up, but Danny hears it. You can see the moment she hears it, she stops, mid-sentence, and turns her head. Her expression is something that Houle described in his notes, struggling for clinical language as, not fear, something adjacent to recognition. Like she was hearing something she had somehow expected to hear. She stands up, she walks toward the passage. Mara calls her name. Twice. Danny does not stop. She walks to the passage opening, and she pauses there 1 second, 2, and the thermal water in the channel nearest the passage entrance catches the bioluminescent light from the walls and lights her from below in that blue-green glow. She looks peaceful. That was what Houle wrote. He circled it. She looks completely, absolutely peaceful. She walks into the passage. She does not look back. The camera does not follow her. Hours 15 through 843 are Mara, alone, surviving. Moving between the water channels, maintaining her field journal as long as she has pages, eventually scratching notes into the mineral deposit walls with a rock. Learning the rhythm of the thermal cycles when the venting increases, when the water rises, when the passages change. Waiting, always waiting for the shaft of light that appears somewhere far above when the surface crust shifts in the thermal cycle and opens a crack wide enough to admit daylight. It takes her 847 hours to find the right crack, and the strength to climb it. The last 4 minutes of footage, hours 8:47, 18 to 8:47, 22, show the camera aimed upward. A shaft of pale natural light falls from 60 feet above. Mara's hands appear at the bottom of frame, gripping the mineral formations of the wall, pulling herself upward, inch by inch. The sound in these final 4 minutes was analyzed separately by the FBI's Quantico Audio Laboratory. The ambient audio, the sound that the thermal chamber makes, its persistent background resonance shifts in the final 4 minutes. It becomes structured, not geological noise, not random venting. Structured, rhythmic, spaced in a pattern that the Quantico analysts described in the unclassified summary of their report as, quote, audio pattern in final 4-minute segment does not match any known geological, biological, or mechanical origin. Classification, unknown. Unknown. And in the final frame, 1 second before the recording ends and the daylight floods the lens and the footage goes white, the camera turns. Something is in the passage behind her. The image is dark, motion blurred, partially obstructed by the angle and the mineral dust disturbed by Mara's climbing. The Forensic Image Enhancement Unit at Quantico processed the frame at multiple magnification levels and submitted their findings under a separate classified appendix. The unclassified summary contains one word: inconclusive. The only person who could explain what was in that passage, who could say with certainty what made that sound, what the structured rhythm meant, what she had lived alongside for 847 hours, was Mara Ellison. And when D.S. Rosario sat across from her in the hospital room and asked gently, carefully, "Mara, in the last 4 minutes of the footage, there is something in the passage behind you. Can you tell me what that is?" Mara folded her hands in her lap. She closed her eyes. She said, "You should ask who let us in." The anonymous tip from February 2023 had said 3 things. You're looking in the wrong direction. Ask about the seasonal worker permits. Someone who was in the park that week went back. D.S. Rosario pulled every NPS seasonal staff employment record from the August 2021 period. She cross-referenced every name against the backcountry access permit logs for the Shoshone-Bechler corridor. Anyone who had authorized access to that terrain during the week of August 10th through the 17th. Most were rangers. Most had documented duty logs, corroborated locations, clean records. One name was different. Grant Aldous, 38 years old at the time of the disappearance. Not an NPS employee directly. A seasonal hydrothermal monitoring technician employed by a private environmental survey contractor called Tessera Environmental Services, LLC. Tessera held a research and access permit from the NPS that authorized its personnel to conduct thermal monitoring in designated zones of the Shoshone Basin, including zones adjacent to, and in some cases overlapping, the dead zone. Aldous had been stationed at a remote monitoring equipment site 2.4 miles from Campsite 9, B3 during the week of August 10th through 18th, 2021. 2.4 miles. Rosario ran his name through the standard background check. No criminal record, no disciplinary history with the NPS or with Tessera. A degree in geological engineering from Montana State. 5 years with Tessera. Good performance reviews. Nothing obvious. She kept looking. Then she found the correspondence. 4 months before the trip in April 2021, Mara Ellison had contacted Tessera Environmental Services through their official research inquiry channel. She had requested access to their proprietary thermal survey data from the Shoshone Basin subzones data that she believed would show anomalies consistent with what she was finding in the published academic surveys. Data that would support her thesis research. The request was denied. The denial was signed by the data management coordinator. But the inquiry had been routed through the field team first. And the field contact who had initially received and reviewed Mara's request, the person whose name appeared on the internal routing log, was Grant Aldous. He had read her inquiry. He knew she was interested in the unmapped zones. He knew she was coming. Rosario requested cell tower records for Aldous's personal phone from the week of the disappearance. The records placed his device within 1.8 miles of campsite 9B3 on the night of August 14th between 8 p.m. and midnight. His duty log for that day showed him at the Tessera monitoring station 9 miles away for the entire shift. The duty log was wrong, or it was a lie. She subpoenaed the GPS records from his work vehicle, a Tessera-owned pickup registered through a fleet tracking system. The records showed normal movement throughout the day, and then a 4-hour gap. Between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. on August 14, 2021, the vehicle's GPS system had logged no data. Not a malfunction, not a dead zone. The logs showed the system had been manually disabled and re-enabled. Someone who knew how the fleet tracker worked. Someone who knew how long they needed. The search warrant was executed on November 3, 2023. Teton County Sheriff's Office warrant, number TCSW 2023-11030-088. Aldous's current residence, a rental property on the east side of Bozeman, Montana. He was cooperative at the door. He was calm in the way that Rosario had learned over 20 years to mistrust. The initial walkthrough produced standard items: furniture, books, a workbench in the garage with geological tools, monitors showing Tessera's current survey data from an ongoing project in Idaho. It was Deputy Cara Ibanez who found the locked box. It was in the bedroom, under the bed. Standard steel lockbox, the kind sold at hardware stores for document storage. The lock was cut. Inside, wrapped carefully in a folded piece of canvas cloth, the kind of careful that suggests preservation, not concealment, was a field journal, 5 by 8 inches, green cover. And on the inside front cover, in Mara Ellison's handwriting, the words, "Property of Mara J. Ellison, UCB, Environmental Sciences." Her missing field journal, missing evidence, item number 2, in the locked box of Grant Aldous, 2 years after she disappeared. Deputy Ibanez stepped back from the box. She called Rosario into the room. She said, "It was wrapped, like a keepsake." The search of Aldous's personal laptop produced a trove of deleted file fragments recovered by the Digital Forensics Unit. Among them, 47 photographs of the subsurface chamber. The same chamber captured by Mara's GoPro. The same blue-green walls, the same mineral formations, the same water channels moving across the floor. But the angle was different. The framing was different. These were not Mara's photographs. Aldous had been inside that chamber independently at a separate time with his own camera, and he had documented it. He had been there before. A second notebook was recovered from the garage workbench, handwritten, the cover labeled 9B3 Access Protocols. It contained detailed notes on entry and exit points to the subsurface system, which surface crust sections were stable enough to access, which thermal cycle windows allowed safe passage through the entrance points, what equipment was needed, what timing was required. and on the final page, in the same handwriting, an entry dated August 14, 2021. It read, "Entry at 17. 3 unknown subjects inside the lower chamber. Did not make contact. Secured eastern access. Will return." Secured eastern access. Rosario read it standing in the garage. She read it twice. She was quiet for a long time. Then she called the U.S. Attorney's office. What the detective found in that room, the journal, the photographs, the notebook with its clinical access notes and its margin entries, and that single line on the final page pointed to one conclusion that no defense attorney would ultimately be able to fully dismantle. Grant Aldous had known that chamber existed long before August 14, 2021. He had known Mara Ellison was looking for it. And on the night she and her friends fell into it, he had sealed the way out. Grant Aldous was arrested on February 14, 2024. He was taken into federal custody at his Bozeman residence without incident. He did not speak except to ask, calmly and precisely, whether he could bring a book. He was charged in the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming with unlawful imprisonment, obstruction of a federal search and rescue operation, theft of federal evidence, specifically Mara Ellison's field journal, and 3 counts of reckless endangerment resulting in presumed death. 1 count for each of the 3 individuals present on August 14, 2021. He pleaded not guilty on all counts. Trial commenced October 7, 2024, before the Honorable Judge Patricia Sung. The prosecution was led by Assistant United States Attorney Marcus Webb, a 14-year federal prosecutor with a background in complex environmental crimes. The defense was led by Vanessa Calthorpe, a respected criminal defense attorney from Cheyenne, who had built her case around a single consistent argument: that Aldous's presence near the site was incidental professional activity, that the journal had been found not stolen, and that no evidence directly placed him as a participant in or cause of the disappearance. She was prepared. She was skilled. She was facing the notebook. AUSA Webb entered the 9B3 Access Protocols notebook as Prosecution Exhibit 31. The authenticity of the handwriting was confirmed by 2 independent forensic document examiners. The fingerprints on the cover and pages matched Grant Aldous with a 12-point confirmation. The entry dated August 14th was read aloud to the jury in full. Entry at 17, 3 unknown subjects inside the lower chamber. Did not make contact, secured eastern access. Will return. Calthorpe argued the notation was ambiguous. That secured could mean checked, assessed, examined, not sealed. That the entry was consistent with a researcher documenting a safety concern at an unstable access point. The jury considered this argument. They did not find it convincing. Mara Ellison took the stand on October 22nd. She was thin, still not as severely as at admission, but thin in a way that did not fully resolve, as though the body remembered what it had endured and would not entirely return from it. She wore a gray sweater. She looked at the jury when she was asked to, and she looked at her hands when she needed a moment, and she spoke in a voice that was quiet and even and completely, devastatingly credible. She was asked, "Did you see Grant Aldous on August 14, 2021? She said, "Yes." She was asked, "Where did you see him?" She said, "At the Eastern Passage, the opening that led toward the surface. He was standing in it, silhouetted against the light from outside. I called to him. I said, help us, please." We fell in. "We need help." He looked at me. For a long time, he just stood there and looked at me. She was asked, "And then what happened?" She said, "He reached to the side. There was a ledge, a formation, a large mineral formation on the wall of the passage. He put both hands on it and he pulled. It shifted across the opening. And it went dark." The courtroom held its silence for 12 seconds. The court reporter's transcript notes it simply as pause. The verdict was delivered on November 8, 2024. Guilty unlawful imprisonment. Guilty obstruction of federal search and rescue operation. Guilty theft of federal evidence. The 3 reckless endangerment counts, the ones relating to Tyler Wren and Danny Cahill, returned a hung jury on all 3. The jury deadlocked 9-3 for conviction, but could not reach unanimity. Without confirmed remains, without a confirmed cause of death, without any physical evidence placing Aldous directly responsible for whatever had ultimately happened to Tyler and Danny in that chamber. Reasonable doubt held in the minds of 3 jurors, and it was enough. Judge Sung sentenced Grant Aldous on December 19, 2024, 34 years in federal custody. No possibility of parole on the federal obstruction charge for a minimum of 17 years. He received the sentence without visible reaction. He was led from the courtroom. He did not look at Mara Ellison as he passed her. She did not look away from him. But the trial left one question completely, deliberately, officially unanswered. Tyler Wren and Danny Cahill are still missing. No charges related to their fate were successfully prosecuted. No investigation into what they followed. What Tyler Wren stared at for hour after hour in that glowing chamber, what sound Danny heard in hour 14, what is in the final frame of the GoPro footage behind Mara's climbing hands was ever formally opened. Nobody asked. Nobody entered it into the court record. Nobody named it. And in January 2025, 6 weeks after sentencing, Grant Aldous's handwritten letter arrived at the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle. The journalist who received it published it in full the following week. Aldous wrote, "I did not put them in danger. I found them in a place they were not supposed to find. Nobody built that space. Nobody made it. It has been there longer than the park, longer than the maps, and it does not like being visited. I secured the entrance to protect the entrance, not to harm the people inside." The 2 who are still missing did not get lost. They chose to go deeper. Ask Mara. She knows. She chose to come back. The Tribune-Eagle ran the letter on page 3. Patricia Ellison read it at her kitchen table. She read it twice. She did not call anyone. She folded it carefully and placed it in the binder, the one she has never closed. Mara Ellison completed 18 months of residential, neurological, and psychological rehabilitation at the Clearwater Institute for Trauma Recovery in Missoula, Montana. The treatment team, led by Dr. Marsh, who had followed her case from the hospital admission onward, documented gradual but meaningful recovery of personal memory. She recognized her mother's face at 6 weeks. She remembered the drive from Denver to Yellowstone at 4 months. She remembered Danny's laugh, Tyler's hands, the freeze-dried beef stroganoff, the living room floor with the gear spread out across it. She does not return to environmental biology. She works part-time at a public library in a small city in the Mountain West. Her attorneys have declined every media request on her behalf. She does not have social media. She does not give interviews. In March 2025, she released a single written statement through her legal team. It read, "I am alive. I am grateful. I do not have answers to the questions people want me to answer. Some things that happen in darkness are not meant to be brought into the light. I tried. I came back. That is all I can give you." Tyler Wren and Danny Cahill remain officially missing. The subsurface chamber, confirmed by NPS and USGS geological teams following the trial as a naturally formed hydrothermal cavity of extraordinary scale, never previously mapped or documented, was sealed in early 2024 under NPS Administrative Closure Order YNP ACO 2024-0114. The entire 3.2-mile thermal zone northeast of Shoshone Lake has been permanently restricted. The signs along the perimeter simply say, "Area closed. No access." No one who reads those signs knows what is beneath them. The orange GoPro Hero 10 Prosecution Exhibit 1, the device that recorded 847 hours of what those 3 people endured, remains in federal evidence storage in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It will stay there until all appeals in the Aldous case are exhausted. After that, under the Federal Evidence Disposition Protocol, it will be destroyed. The recording will be destroyed with it. The 847 hours, all but the first 4 hours of trail and morning light, and 3 people laughing, and the last 4 minutes of a woman climbing toward daylight with something behind her will be gone. Fewer than 12 people have seen the full footage. None of them have spoken publicly about what it contains. In Dr. Marsh's therapy notes, notes that have never been entered into public record, that exist only in a locked file in a clinical office in Missoula, there is a line from Mara's 3rd session. Circled in red ink, it reads, "Patient stated, unprompted. The ground asked me if I wanted to stay. I said no. It let me go. Tyler and Danny said yes." Below the circle, Dr. Marsh wrote 4 words. Do not follow up. We talk about wilderness like it is a place that tolerates us, like it is scenery, like it is backdrop. We walk in with our permits and our satellite communicators and our freeze-dried meals and our orange cameras. And we believe, because we have always been allowed to leave before, that leaving is something we get to decide. But every now and then, rarely, quietly, without announcement, the wilderness does not release someone. And we call it a disappearance. Because disappearance is a word that lets us stay comfortable. It lets us believe something happened to them, that it was circumstances, that the world they came back to is the same world they left. Mara Ellison came back from somewhere that does not appear on any map. What she brought back in her remineralized bones, in the silica under her skin, in the particular stillness behind her eyes, came back with her. The rest stayed below. And the ground, somewhere under the thermal fields of Yellowstone, is still talking. Whether it is saying something, we have never been able to determine. Some trails lead back, and some were never meant to be walked. Channel name, Dark Trails. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new disappearance every week. Dark Trails.